There are so many conflicts in life. Republicans disagree with Democrats. Business fights with its critics. So where do you go to get the truth? To the media, of course. I'd like to believe you get the unvarnished truth from the media, but of course you don't. And no one's exposed and explained that better than the author of Bias. A CBS insider exposes how the media distort the news. The author, Bernie Goldberg, of course, is no longer a CBS insider. He now works here at Fox. And Bernie, that book is 15 years old or so now, but it was this huge bestseller. You preceded it with this Wall Street Journal column that I happened to see when I was on an airplane, and I was working at ABC at the time, and I was just so frustrated with the suffocating bias where all my colleagues acted like, oh, we're not biased, we're just telling the truth. And I got so excited by your column that I, like, screamed out loud, and people were looking at me. But let me just describe to the audience. The title was Networks Need a Reality Check. You said the old argument that networks have liberal bias is so blatantly true it hardly is worth discussing anymore. And you talked about one CBS report on the Steve Forbes proposal for a flat tax, which they called a scheme, and worse. You described it was written by your friend, Eric Enberg. Is he still your friend?
No.
And
no,
what,
as a matter of fact, after that piece came out, a whole bunch of my former friends stopped talking to me. It was the first piece written by a mainstream reporter about liberal bias while I was still a mainstream reporter. I don't think one has been written even since 1996 by a mainstream reporter. So no, Eric stopped talking to me, Dan Rather talking to me, and a whole bunch of other people stopped talking to me.
That's what I noticed at ABC, too, once I came out of the closet and said I was a libertarian, that I thought they'd argue. I thought we'd have stimulating political discussions and that they would say why they disagreed. But they just go, oh, he's beneath talking to.
Yeah, what happened is you have a whole bunch of people who think alike. It's groupthink. And as a result of groupthink, the news that your colleagues at ABC said, we're just telling the truth, they were telling the truth filtered through a liberal prism. And that's the problem with bias. Not a conspiracy, but too many like-minded people making the decisions on what the audience and the reader gets to read and see on TV.
But what I get is that since these are supposed to be seekers of truth, why this silent treatment? Like Peter Jennings, when he would see me in the hall at ABC, he would just go, oh, and turn his head away. Like I had embarrassed ABC News by my mere existence. But why didn't they come at you and me and say, how can you believe this? Or why do you accuse us of liberal bias? And have a discussion.
Let me give you my personal experience with that. The day before that Wall Street Journal came out, talking about liberal bias in the mainstream media, this was in February of 1996. Dan Rather was in Iowa for the caucuses. I knew I had to call him. I worked for him on the evening news, and I knew I had to call and give him a heads up, so I did. I said, Dan, there's going to be an article coming out tomorrow that I wrote in the Wall Street Journal, an op-ed, and you're not going to be happy with it. And before I could say anything else, he said, Bernie, and these are his exact words, Bernie, we were friends yesterday, we're friends today, and we'll be friends tomorrow. What'd you write? I told him what I wrote, and from that day in February 1996 until this day in February of 2012, Dan Rather had spoken a grand total of 0 words to me. And here was one of his people. I wasn't a conservative ideologue. I had never in 28 years at CBS News, not even once, been accused of having a conservative bias. I'm not some right-wing screwball coming at him, you know, who he could simply dismiss. And that was the problem. And that might have been the problem with also. We were legitimate journalists making this point.
So
we
argue with us.
Right-wing activists.
Why don't they argue with us? Why do they just go, oh, they look at us like we're some spill on the sidewalk. We've done something disgusting.
Because they don't want to get into a discussion because some truths may come out that they don't want to deal with.
So what does the public do to get the truth? Who do you trust? Who do you go to for media sources?
The short answer is go to more than one news source. Because if this source is going to filter it through this prism and this source is going to filter it through that prism, I know people have jobs. They don't have all day to read newspapers or watch TV or go online. But get your news from, and your opinions from more than one place if you can.
I find I learn, we do our reading often, we see the claim from one side, so we just go to the other side and say, well, what do you say about this? And go back and forth, and that's how we get to the truth. But you're right, people don't have the time or the interest in doing that. Thank you, Bernie Goldberg.
Thank you, John.
Nepotism. We all know that's evil, but then how come we keep electing Kennedys and Bushes and Clintons and Romneys? Why do we trust these people? We talk about nepotism next.